Good, thank you, Alex. A couple of announcements. Let me back up and get them in order here. Teachers will be at the Educator Convention in Charlottesville Thursday and Friday, so there are no academy classes. And then we had a couple of things that are going to have to be changed. There's no volleyball Thursday night, and then there was a youth activity planned for Saturday, and they will not have that either. And that's because we're having the concrete done down there, and we thought they would be finished, and they're not going to be finished. We knew that for Thursday night, but for Saturday they're not going to be finished either, so we're going to have to postpone those things. And then Sunday, we have a Senior Saints lunch, and so if your last name begins with A through N, bring a side dish, and if your last name begins with O through Z, bring a dessert. And we're having chicken, so if your side dish needs to go with chicken, whatever that would be, whatever your favorite side dish with chicken would be. So mashed potatoes always works well. Or any kind of potatoes actually work well. Yeah. Then the Academy Thanksgiving dinner, some of you have come to that. If you want to purchase a ticket for that, you can do it through the school office. And then we have our memory verse, Hebrews 13:15. Let's say that together. Let me back up and I'll leave it on the screen again while we're saying it, but let's say it. Hebrews 13:15, by him therefore let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. Hebrews 13:15. All right? So has anybody gotten it memorized yet? Are you close on it? Kind of halfway there? All right. Yeah, I like that verse. It just has a nice ring to it. All right? Okay, Romans 12. Any other big news, announcements, things that are going on? You enjoying the cold weather? See, I like it cold. The wind I'm not as fond of, but I don't mind the cold weather. Yeah. So no other big, like, Jesse, anything big going on in your life? Just kind of, that's probably good. Yeah. Yeah, I think things are quiet. That's a good thing. Okay. All right, so we're in Romans 12, and Sunday, we did verses 1 and 2 on Sunday morning, and those are verses that are full of information. And then verses 3 through 8, talking about your responsibilities in the church. And then it's kind of hard to put some of these other verses, you can easily quibble as to where the break should be. There's actually a paragraph break in verse 9. But to me, it almost seems like the next few verses should be part of what we studied in relation to the church, but most people put them in here. But we're talking about how to practice our righteousness. How do we make the righteousness come alive? What's it look like when it comes out? So if I understand biblical righteousness the way that Paul has described it in chapters 1 through 11, and I accept that, and I understand that I belong to God and his grace has been demonstrated to me, then I yield myself to him, I give myself to him, and that's the dedication. So I have the salvation, the dedication, and then the transformation in verse 2, that I'm changed. And that change will play itself out in life. You'll see that. It'll make a difference in the way you interact with people. And so in your church, in verses 3 through 8, you'll use your talents, your gifts for the Lord, and be thinking of other people rather than just yourself. Then he comes to verse 9, and in verses 9 through 21, he's actually going to just give us a lengthy series of short exhortations. You might call them commands, short exhortation or commands dealing with your relationships to other people, both saved and unsaved. Some of them obviously deal with saved, some of them could be saved or unsaved, some of them could be both. And so it's hard when you go down through here to say, okay, we're going to do a preaching message on this, because this is really just him listing some things. And I think I've put them down as 13 statements. Somebody else could go through and come up with 18. Somebody else might combine some of them and come up with 10. There is no set number. I've just gone through, and as I've studied them, I've listed them, and I've come up with 13 of them. So this is just a lengthy passage of short exhortations or commands dealing with your relationship with other people, saved and unsaved. And so verses 9 and 10, these are, and I'm stealing these titles from various people, but what we would call key ingredients for success, or maybe the key ingredient for success, and I think this would be true. All right, so let's do this. Let's begin at verse 9, and I'd like to read all of them to start with. And so let's go from verses 9 through 21. And I've got the sinus pressure and drainage, so somebody else gets to read tonight. Who wants to be our reader to start with this evening? All right, there you go. Tasha? Oh, yeah, 9 through 21. Do the whole thing.
Let love be without dissimulation. Am I in the right place?
You are. Mm-hmm.
Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, and honor preferring one another. Overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good.
Okay, so you can see that this is just, he's going down and he's saying, okay, here's what I'll see when righteousness is practiced. When I watch your life and I see it oozing out, these are the things that I'll see. So, verses 9 and 10, let's back up and look at those. He says, let love be without dissimulation, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. So here is the first set of exhortations. And I'm going to put them up here in New American Standard. So if you have a King James, you can compare the terminology. You can see what it's talking about. So when you go to verse 9, it says, let love be without hypocrisy. King James says, without dissimulation. And that's kind of a cool word if you want the cool word for the day, dissimulation. But what does it mean for love to be without hypocrisy? I'm going to ask you for a lot of information on this tonight because it's really more of a discussion type of passage rather than just teaching or informative. You got to think through, what does this mean? So what is hypocritical love? What would that bring to your mind when you think of let love be without hypocrisy? What would be hypocritical love?
Sincere love.
Okay, sincere love. All right, good. Yeah. So, Chipper.
Are you asking what it is, or what is hypocritical love?
Yeah, what is hypocritical love?
I guess that would be kind of doing things for people and developing relationships, but you're kind of first.
Okay.
Your interests are more important. You have an agenda, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Rebecca?
Asking for something you're not willing to give.
Okay, that's good. Asking for something that you're not willing to give. Anybody else? What is hypocritical love? If I said their love is hypocritical, what would that mean? Daryl?
Is it mainly doing it so others see you doing it?
Okay, yeah, so others would see you doing it. Yeah. Yeah. Ron?
The Old Testament puts it, they love with their lips, but not with their heart.
Yeah, right. It's a love that's outward, not inward. Now, Jason hit on it. The actual word here is sincere. And you may have heard this before, but this word was something where they would often use it to talk about like a vase. If a vase had a crack in it, sometimes the they would fill it with wax, and it would look like it was okay, but after a while that wax would come apart or would fall out of there, and the vase was no good. And so in order to find out if something was filled with wax, you would take it and turn it upside down and look at it, and if you could see light through it, you knew that that was wax. And they said that was insincere. It wasn't something that was honest. It wasn't pure. And so when he says, I want your love to be without hypocrisy, I want it to be sincere. And all of these things that you mentioned, some really good things, I think would be part of that. That it's not selfish love. It's not love that you're doing just for show. It's not love that you're doing so you'll get something back. It is something you're doing just because you love. Now, I have drilled a definition of love into most of you. They're actually going to be in our bulletin for during 2020, some of these definitions. But love is a selfless commitment to another's highest good. And so if we think of that, let love, your selfless commitment to another's highest good, be without hypocrisy. Don't be hypocritical in your love for other people. All right, so then let's add number 2 to that. I'll leave let love be without hypocrisy up there. But here's the second one. Abhor. The word abhor simply means hate what is good. Cling to, hate what is evil, not hate what is good. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And you have a very similar statement in the King James where it says cleave to what is good. Cleave or cling, same idea there. Okay, so tell me what you think about this. Any ideas come to mind either with this idea of abhorring what is evil or of clinging to what is good? What ought we to say about that in relation to making sure that we see that practiced in a display of our righteousness? John?
I would say it's easy, especially when we see all the evil around us, to become sort of callous to it and not really realize how much it grieves God.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's very possible that evil becomes so commonplace that we don't really have any hatred for it anymore. It's just like, yeah, well, that's what it is. Okay, good. All right, other observations. Jason?
Well, it's not just hating what is evil, but do what's good. Go cling to what's good.
Good.
It's
Yeah.
Avoid the evil, but go out of your way to make it good.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you up here because you're hitting some good points. It might be in my bulletin here in just a minute.
I think what he's saying is true because you can't really hate evil without loving good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. You have to have the something to fill the vacuum. Yeah. If you're going to hate evil, what are you going to do? All right. Okay. Anything else? Tasha?
I don't know, I think it kind of goes back to even the first part, because if you were loving correctly,
Mm-hmm.
then that is clinging to the good,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not being deceitful or evil by loving incorrectly.
I think you've gotten all of them. Maybe except the second one here, which is something I wanted to throw out. But what Tasha is saying, I think perhaps this could be, and this is why when people number these, you might have this all number 1. But I put it as number 2 because I think it's a separate command. But it could very easily be an explanation of what's taking place in the first one, let love be without hypocrisy. If you're going to have unhypocritical love, you've got to hate evil and cling to what is good. I tend to think maybe it's a separate statement. But hating sin is biblical. You have this mindset out there that we're never to hate. Well, we're never to hate people in that sense, but we're to hate sin. That is a biblical idea. Why should we hate sin? Daryl? Because God hates sin. It's the opposite of God. And so there's nothing wrong with us hating sin. That ought to be true for us, that we hate sin. And I think, John pointed it out, I think we get, callous isn't the right word, but what would be the other word? We get, well, what is it? Desensitized. Yeah, we get desensitized to it. And we don't really hate it any longer because it's just around there. And so I don't notice it as much. And I know that that's true because I'm like that. This whole, LGBTQT thing just throws it out there and it just becomes part of what's there. But there ought to be a hatred for sin. Doesn't mean you hate people, but you can hate some actions that ought not to be there and things that are wrong. Then the third thing that's up there, you all picked out very well. There is clearly a twofold exhortation here. You're to abhor what is evil, clearly. You're to hate that. But if you stop there, you're really just a negative, hateful person. You have to cling to what is good. You have to decide, I'm going to hold on to the things that are good things. And I want those things to be what are part of my life. I'm going to cling to those things that are right and those things that are good. And then number 3 here is the next verse. In verse 10 he says, in the King James it says, be kindly affectioned one to another, with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. And in New American Standard it says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. And you can see here again, we could do number 3 or number 3 and 4. I kept these two together as I was doing it because I think they're probably connected. I'm to be devoted to one another in brotherly love. That's why I think this could refer back to the church. Give preference to one another in honor. All right, so give me your thoughts on this. What are some things we ought to say about this exhortation? Self-explanatory, don't really need to say anything.
I think it still goes back to that first part of,
Let love be without dissimulation? Yeah? Okay.
what's that word, that hermeneutic? What's that word?
Hermeneutic.
That word.
Yeah.
I'm getting up there with him.
Okay, yeah. You keep taking my Sunday school class.
But it is, because again, it refers to devotion, and that's not hypocritical.
Right.
If you're devoted, you are.
Very true. Yeah. And that's why I think we're saying this is these are the foundational verses for all the other commands that are going to come. We want that love to be without dissimulation, without that hypocrisy. And so we come to this and we say we want to be devoted to one another. Now, clearly, this is a family affection. And that's where I looked at this, as I said, and I thought, all right, this is clearly talking to believers. We're to be devoted to one another in brotherly love. And so he's not talking about in the general sense of you're devoted to mankind in brotherly love. He's very targeted here in saying this is a relationship that believers have, and I believe he would be saying believers have within the local body, where we're devoted to one another in brotherly love. And you have a family affection that's there. And those family affections are real. You are very well aware of that. There are some people who don't have that, a limited number that for some reason have such a truly dysfunctional family. Every family is dysfunctional, but a truly dysfunctional family, and they don't understand that brotherly love, but most of us understand that. But there is a love and an allegiance to family that's just ingrained in you. It's just there. You understand your responsibility. And he said that's the way it ought to be. That when you're a believer and that righteousness comes out, there ought to be a devotion to one another in brotherly love. And then he said, let's go a little bit beyond that, giving preference to one another in honor. So I'm going to think of others as better than myself. This would make us think about Philippians chapter 2, where it talks about Christ and where he took off his divinity and took on humanity, and it said that he thinks of others. He considers others better than themselves. That we have this others-oriented mindset where I'm going to honor people. I'm going to think about their needs rather than my needs. And this is something that will happen to a person who really, truly has gotten the idea of righteousness. All right, so there's the first little group of them. I think we could group those together and say these are foundational things that we're going to love without hypocrisy, and we're going to come to the place where we say, I really, truly have a love for those that are in the church, and since I have that love, I'm going to be devoted to them as though they're my family. They're going to be my Christian family, and I'm going to honor them and give preference to them. And if people do that, what happens in a church family? What's the result? Carol? Unity. Tremendous unity. Care for one another. You know, and when somebody does something, it just spurs somebody else to do something. And you have a mindset that is really the mindset that believers are supposed to have. All right, let's go on to verses 11 through 15. And we'll call these personal attitudes that make you more attractive to others. Okay? You know, and I think there are some other headings we could put there, but these are some things that we need to have that are going to really endear us to other people. So look at verse 11. And verse 11, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. So in that, we have actually three statements. And this idea of not, when the King James says not slothful in business, not lagging behind in diligence. I meant to look at some other translations of that, but it is just really that idea of that I'm going to be, put my effort forth. I'm going to do what I can to get things done. The fervency in spirit. That I'm going to try to have just an energetic personality. And then serving the Lord. Really, the emphasis here is on that I'm going to be serving. That I'm going to find my niche and I'm going to serve the Lord. And those first two tell how we're going to serve, the attitude with which we're going to serve. I'm going to be diligent and I'm going to be enthusiastic. And I'm going to do it with everything that I can, not lagging behind in diligence. I'm going to be diligent in what I do. Then you go on, and Numbers 5, 6, and 7, I went ahead and separated these. In verse 12, the King James Version says, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, serving the Lord. And so you have three things here, and these could either be independent, or they could be additional descriptions of how we're to serve. We're to serve with joy. We're to serve with patience. We're to serve with a persistent prayerfulness. And they could be independent, where we're just saying, all right, we want people who are rejoicing in hope. What's the opposite of rejoicing in hope? Chipper? All right, despairing. Yeah, I think that's a good word. Okay? What else? If I'm not rejoicing in hope, what am I doing? What is it? Doubting Thomas? Anxious? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen and I'm nervous all the time. Well, rejoicing in hope, what is the hope? All right, the return of Christ will be one of the things that would certainly be my hope. What else? What's the hope that you have for eternity? To be with God in heaven. Yeah. And remember, hope is often, in this case would be true, is not hope as in, might not. Hope is, my hope is in the Lord. It's my assurance. I'm rejoicing in assurance. If the worst happens, the next one there, persevering in tribulation, and I'm martyred. Okay, that's the worst you can do to me, huh? You'll send me to heaven. I'll miss family for a little while, but that's the worst you can do to me. And he says, you persevere in that tribulation. And then he said, devoted to prayer. This is probably the one that we're the least, probably the one that we need to listen to the most. is just to have this attitude of communion with God, communication with God on a regular basis. And I don't think he means devoted to coming to a prayer meeting, devoted to, some specific time during the day. I think he means devoted to carrying on a conversation with God on a regular basis. This pray without ceasing idea, that I can talk to God whenever I want to talk to him. And then number 8 is in verse 13. In verse 13, and the King James says, distributing to the necessity of the saints, given to hospitality. So you have 2 ideas there. Tell me what you think about these. Contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. Are those the same? Are they different? What are things that we ought to know about that? Carol?
They seem different to me.
Okay.
Contributing, you see a need and you give to help, whether it's food or money.
Mm-hmm.
And practicing hospitality, I think of, is having people come,
Right.
inviting people to your home.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. You have one that's inward and one that's outward. So outwardly, I'm looking at the needs of the saints. Now, the need could be to have them come and stay with me, but I see and I contribute to the needs. But then practicing hospitality means that I'm going to bring them in and take care of them. Okay? What else? Contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. Any other ideas that come to your mind there? Things that we ought to think through?
NIV splits it up. It says share with the Lord's people who are in need, and it actually has a period.
Okay.
And then practice hospitality.
Okay, so they actually take it as 2 completely separate phrases. Is that a comma up there? I can't really tell. There's a comma on New American Standard. What's King James have? A semicolon, so they separate the ideas as well. Carol?
Needs can be more than just physical things.
Mm-hmm.
It could be encouragement.
Sure. Yeah. It could be that somebody has a spiritual need, an emotional need. Yeah. When you see this, the idea of contributing to the needs of the saint, it's in its root, it's related to the phrase having all things common. Where did we see that phrase? Or where do we see that phrase in the New Testament? Ron?
Acts 5, verses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Area where they give of their lands and things to the
Yes.
church.
Yeah, the early church, this wasn't prescriptive. In other words, it wasn't God saying you have to do this. But when they got saved, they put all of their material wealth together, and then they distributed as people had need. And of course, that didn't work real well as the church grew. I don't know that it was intended, but it certainly showed the mindset, and it shows what he's talking about here. That they wanted to make sure that the people in their group had their needs met, contributing to the needs of the saints. And I think that there is a special responsibility that we have to the saints. Later in Galatians, he'll talk about especially those of the household of faith, that you have a special responsibility to them. And then he says practicing hospitality. Now, one of the commentators that I looked at says this is talking about pursuing friendliness to strangers. I don't know if it's just to strangers. I think it's a little more broad than that. There would be hospitality to whomever, whether it's a fellow believer or whether it is somebody who's just in need, that you're going to be hospitable to people. What do we normally think of when we think of practicing hospitality? What action would you do to practice hospitality for people? What is it?
Welcoming them
Into where?
your home,
Yeah.
wherever.
All right, perhaps church, but normally when I think of practicing hospitality, I think of somebody who will welcome people into their home to feed them, perhaps to give them shelter. But he said this is something that the church should do, that there should be a hospitality that we offer to people. We're not as good about that now as people have been in the past. It used to be people would have guests in their home regularly. It would be a normal thing. As a matter of fact, when Dad got saved and we started going to church, when a missionary came, where did they stay? Where?
People's home.
Somebody's house. You know, the pastor, I can remember, he would just get up and say, hey, so-and-so's coming. Who wants to keep him? And, you know, and there would actually be people who would volunteer. You'd eat husbands and wives saying, yeah, and then, oh yeah, we'll do that. That was pretty normal. Our family did it. I met a lot of good missionaries. I should say I met a lot of missionaries. But we kept people. And it was good to have them in our home. And there's hospitality. And so there is this pursuing friendliness to strangers. Just getting to know people and be willing to reach out to people. And remember what we're talking about. This is righteousness being displayed, being shown. All right, let's go on to the next section. And it's talking about the emotions or reactions to actions and emotions of others. So in verse 14, bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. And then verse 15, rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another, mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. The first two verses, verses 14 and 15, he says, okay, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. So you're going to be persecuted, and your response is, I'm going to bless them, not curse them. What's your natural response, your fleshly response when somebody persecutes you? Yeah, I'm going to figure out, I'm going to get back at you. I'm going to figure out how to get you. That's my fleshly response. How many of you are pretty good at that? Oh, come on. I am. Yeah, I can be vicious if I would let myself. But he says you're going to have to let that righteousness come out in a different way. When people persecute you, you bless and not curse. And this is a hard thing to do. This is when the Spirit has really controlled you. There are two that I think of as examples of this. One would be Jesus himself. He was, of all people, most inhumanely and unfairly persecuted. Died on the cross as a sinless man and was accused and mistreated, and yet he blessed and didn't curse. And then you have Stephen. And of course his example in Acts 7 tells us the response that we ought to have, and we hope we would have if we found ourselves in that kind of a situation. Verses 9 and 10, or verse 15 is number 10. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep, or the idea is mourn with those who weep. So I'm going to recognize the needs of people. What do we call this? What is described in verse 15? Shobana? Oh, we talked about this. Rejoicing with somebody who rejoices and weeping with somebody who weeps. Empathetic. There you go. See, I knew she knew it. Yeah. I have empathy. I feel with people. I sense the needs that they have. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Why would he have to say that? To me, that almost seems like something you wouldn't have to say. But why would he have to say, you're going to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep? Ron?
Too many of us are selfish and wish we had what the other person had.
Okay. Yeah. Especially on the rejoicing side. I can't rejoice with you because I didn't get it. I wanted what you had. Chipper?
I was thinking it's more, we're naturally indifferent. It's not so much, even if we don't want what the other person has, we can care less if it doesn't impact us.
Right. It's still a selfishness, but I don't care what's going on around me. I don't have that empathy. I'm not paying attention to the needs of people. And this would just be more of what he's been saying. Look, what's happening in your fellow believer in your church family? I hope you're rejoicing with them. But then there's some who are mourning. They're struggling, and you ought to be there with them. And it doesn't mean that you're going to fall into the bad things that, somebody is depressed. I don't have to get depressed. I go over and help that depressed person. I'm there to encourage them and bring them along. And then let's look at one more. There's the word empathy there. Let's look at verse 16. And in verse 16, he's going to say, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation." And here's one that it was very difficult to figure out how to number it, because this could be two separate things. But he says here, I want you to be of the same mind, to think the same way toward one another. Don't be haughty in your mind. What's the other word for haughty? What's pride? Yeah, it's pride. Don't be proud in the way you think, but associate with the lowly. Don't be wise in your own estimation. So when he says don't be wise in your own estimation, how would you restate that? Just so we make sure we know what it says. Jason?
Don't be conceited.
Don't be conceited. Yeah. Don't fall into conceit. And so he says, I want you to live in harmony. It's the same attitude. Be of the same attitude toward one another. Not this way with one person, this way with another person. That's that dissimulation. Be sincere. But be of the same mind one toward another. And don't be haughty. Don't be proud in your mind, in your own thinking. Don't lift yourself up. But then you associate. And so you've got a negative and a positive here. He says the negative is this pride, or this conceit, as Jason said, where you're conceited. You think very highly of yourself. And he said, no, let's not do that, but let's do the positive, and that is associate with the lowly. Now, how do you associate with lowly people? All right, bring yourself down to their level. I think that will be one thing. Carol?
Treat them like you treat anybody.
Okay, yeah. I think that's an important statement. It isn't that I'm treating one person one way and one person another way. I'm not going up and shaking one guy's hand, giving him a hug, and then there's a guy comes in and I'm like, you shake your hand. I'm going to associate. I'm going to have the same love for this person that I have for this person. There's going to be a similarity to it. And I may help that person with some things, but I'm going to associate with them. And even in that, I associate with them for the purpose of discipling them, bringing them along. And that's something that I'm charged to do. And so I want to make sure that I'm at the place where I'm willing to do that, just to reach out to other people. And this could be saved or lost. Now, in verses 17 through 18, he's going to talk about our relationship to unbelievers. But in verses 17 through 21, he's actually going to go back and he's going to begin to pull some things out of the Old Testament and some things we may want to take just a little bit more time to make sure that we understand. Because this is the passage where he says that you can heap coals of fire on someone's head. Now, how would you like to do that to some people? But we better make sure what he's talking about when he says that we're going to do something, heap coals of fire on somebody's head. All right? So we're going to stop there tonight, and next week we'll actually pick this up, and then we're going to skip a little bit and move on in chapter 13 as well. All right? So let's go ahead and pray, and then we will pass out a prayer sheet. Father, thank you for the time, and I pray that you will help us to benefit from these exhortations and help us to know what you want us to do and how to do it. And Lord, help us to evaluate ourselves to accomplish your will. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hi, my name is Tim. I'm a pastor of preaching here at Grace Baptist Church, and I just want to invite you to join us some Sunday. I know you'll find a warm group, a family of Christians that will embrace you and help you to grow in your Christian faith. We're actually right in the middle of Queens, Forest Hills, and just like Queens, our church is very diverse as well. People from all over the world, many different ethnicities, languages, food, and even situations, life, ages, all kind of mixed together to form a healthy, vibrant body. And we wanted you to join with us. It's interesting how the church is kind of like made up of all these different jewels, right? We all have these different backgrounds that we bring to the table, and the Lord is shaping us, fashioning us to what He wants us to be. And He wants to shape you as well. He may use a chisel. He may use pressure, and sometimes that doesn't feel so good. But it's all to make you more like Jesus. And when we meet on Sunday, it's like He's bringing us all together, shaping us, fashioning us into a diadem or a crown to fit on the head of the church, the King of Kings, Jesus. And so when we meet together, we need you to join too, to be a sparkling jewel in that crown, to worship the Lord. So please come and take part. You may say, well, what is Grace Baptist Church like? Whenever somebody asks me that, I really try to say it's a Bible-driven church or a Bible-based church. What does that mean? Well, if you were to ask one person what they would want in a church or another person what they would want in a church, you'd probably get two different solutions or answers to the question, what do you want in church? And what we've tried to do is ask the question, what does God want in church? And of course, we know the answer to that would be in the Bible. And so that's really what should shape and fashion our church, right? We're not trying to create an entertainment venue or concert or circus, but a church of serious people that want to grow in their faith. And I really believe that's what we're seeing the Lord do here. And that's important. That's important for you, right? The Bible is so important for you that the Lord uses His Word to awaken us, to quicken us. It's a hammer to kind of chisel away at us, but it's a balm to heal us. It's an encouraging tool that God uses. I think of the psalmist in Psalm 19 that says, "The word of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul." We all need soul restoration. You need soul restoration. And we find that each Sunday as we meet in a Bible-driven church. The Lord uses His Word to build His people. And so when you come, you'll find that. Very deliberate about being Bible-driven. And the Lord's Word will build you up as you're with the community of saints, being built up to the glory of God. Just like that crown, that diadem, as the Lord uses His Word to shape and fashion us for His glory.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm hoping that this video will be worth 1,000 words on this webpage. Hi, I'm Pastor Wright from Keystone Baptist Church. Thank you for taking the time to visit our website today. Unfortunately, words on a page can only do so much to give you a feel for a church. There's no substitute for actually visiting. You probably already know that. But sometimes walking into a strange place with people you don't know is a little intimidating. That's why we've created this video. I want to give you a visual tour of what to expect when you're our guest here at church. When you arrive at the church, You can park in either the front or the back parking lot, but you'll probably end up parking in the back parking lot because there are more spaces here. From that parking lot, look for the wide sidewalk that'll lead you into the west wing. The west wing doors will take you into a hallway that'll take you to the foyer, and in that foyer is an information desk. There'll be somebody at that information desk that can help you get your children to Sunday school, the nursery, or wherever else you need. Don't forget, anytime during the process of coming in, our church family will be happy to help you. Just ask somebody. They'll point you in the right direction. Families are always concerned about the care for their children. When you arrive here at the information desk, one of our church members will either be behind this desk or right outside the desk. They'll help you get to the right place. On Wednesday night, we have our Patch Club, Keystone Kids, and Royalty Club. Those young people will go to the different areas, and then the adults will be here in the auditorium for the Bible study. Now, for those of you who have young children, our nursery is down the hallway on the east wing. As you go down that hallway, you'll find that there are two doors. If you go to the last door, there's a procedure for picking up and dropping off your child. When you pick up and drop off your child, our nursery workers will give you some information and they'll answer your questions for you. Those workers rotate from service to service under the direction of Mrs. Skidmore. Now, I know, because I'm the father of 3 children, that the last thing you want to hear is your child crying when you leave. But that's a normal thing. When you leave the nursery, you'll be given one of these. It is a parent pass, and it's a pager. If our staff cannot get your child settled down, or if they need you during the service for any reason,